This episode is sponsored by the Bridge to Recovery, a nonprofit program on 115 acres near Bowling Green, Kentucky, a tranquil place where they've been changing lives for over 40 years. Their people improve their quality of life by acknowledging past emotional wounds and healing from all forms of trauma. The CEO, Paul Hamlin, has been a friend of mine for 20 years. Call him directly at 858-945-7848. That's 858-945-7848, or you can learn more about the Bridge to Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting thebridgetororecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
This is David Paul, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
Thanks for listening. My name's Tom Gentry. And this episode features a conversation with a friend of mine of many years named David Paul. It's a little bit of a continuation of some episodes I've had recently with people who, just weren't satisfied with what they were doing with their lives from a vocational standpoint, and they just walked away from their jobs and went and redefined themselves. So, Dave's a great guy. We talk about all sorts of stuff. Living with intention. Just having the freedom to be who you are. Wanting more from life, letting go of the limitations that we impose upon ourselves, and just doing whatever we want. Talk about manhood. We talk about fatherhood. He talks about being a husband, and what that means to him, and what he does to be a better husband. So it was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. David Paul.
Just the product of some bad seeds. Just some guys that grew into
David, it's great to talk to you.
Thanks, Tom. It's been way too long, and I'm thrilled to be talking to you as well.
I'm trying to think of, I know it's probably been at least 5 years, right?
Yeah, I would say that's about right.
How long ago did you move away from Florida?
It was about 5 years ago. A little bit, maybe a little less, maybe 4.5. And I don't think we talked. I think it was a social media interaction, and it was kind of a little quick catch up. But yeah, that was my big trip out west about 4.5 years ago.
Well, I remember when we last talked. I think you were in the process of selling your business down here, or you were preparing to do that. So that was a big change, right?
Yeah, it was. That business was my albatross for a while.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of context for the listeners. I was running a home health care agency up in Palm Beach County, and it was probably the most concentrated, next to addiction facilities, most concentrated healthcare modality service in the county. I mean, I think I had 200 competitors that were all, fighting for the same referrals. And, I started the business after I left Hanley Center as a case manager, and never wanted to be the senior guy, the senior healthcare guy. I didn't have a particular passion for it, but I wanted to task myself with building something and selling it within 4 years and creating a brand. And that's kind of what the genesis was with that. And, it was a good business. I learned a lot. I made a ton of mistakes, but I was able to make some money on it. I didn't set the world on fire by any means, but I sold it, and I went to go check on it a couple years after. And, everyone just fucks up your business after you sell it.
Yeah.
But I still had some of the same clients and some of the same employees. So it felt good to know that I had some, that I gave something of value. Not everything fell apart after I left.
Yeah. And you did something that contributes to the lives of other people.
Yeah.
It's meaningful to other people. So I heard you in this other podcast talk about this pivotal moment in your life and in your career when you kind of said, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go for it. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So that particular instance was when I was working at the Hanley Center, which is a drug and alcohol treatment center located in West Palm Beach. And I worked in it for a couple of years, or at Hanley for a couple of years, and also the treatment industry as a whole. And, like any person who's relatively new in sobriety, I thought my great aspiration in life was to become a substance abuse counselor. And, I wanted to work with the guys that helped me get sober. And, and after doing it for a while, I realized that it wasn't as magical as I thought it was. And, it wasn't that they were bad people, but I honestly got bored, Tom. And, you think you're diving into this human connection and you're really going to figure these people out, and, you're going to understand the human, condition so much more, but you really just see the same four people over and over again.
Well, it can definitely get like that. That's for sure. Yeah. Not everybody really is cut out for it. And I've talked to you about what I'm doing now, and we have a long history. When we met in the position that I was in, that was basically after I had gone through this period of continuing to try to leave the addiction treatment industry to go do other stuff that I was interested in doing, because I never wanted my life to be kind of relegated to just this. I wanted to have a bigger life than that. And so, it isn't that I necessarily couldn't go do other stuff, but what began to become apparent is that all the real good opportunities that I was getting were in addiction treatment or somehow related to that. And so finally it was kind of like looking toward the sky and saying, okay, I get it. Like, you want me doing this for a while, so I'll stop fighting it. Which then probably the best creative business experience I ever had ensued after that.
Sure.
Which is when we crossed paths. So I'm kind of like you, like I ended up doing this for a long time, but that wasn't really the plan. And now I'm at a point where I'm ready to kind of veer off into another direction and do some different stuff and kind of help people at a higher level with different things besides just addiction. But anyway, so I digressed. So that job, where were you?
Oh, yeah. So I was there, and I was sitting, and I remember I went into an office where there was two counselors that I very much respected, and they were talking about a patient, and I just remember where these conversations usually went. I was usually very interested, and at this point I became very uninterested in the conversation. And it was not that what they were saying was interesting in general. I didn't have the passion for it.
Yeah.
Like, I lost it, and it was more about me and my ego than it was about the patient. And I kind of knew at that point it was time to move on. I was more interested in progressing myself as opposed to helping people. So I remember I was sitting in this kind of cubicle in the admissions office, and I pulled out my seat and I looked at a buddy next to me and I said, I think I'm going to quit. And the guy looks at me and he goes, I think you should. I thought he was going to try to get, so I got up and I gave the manager on duty my 2-week notice, and the rest was history.
Wow. Just like that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. My experience with leaving there when I left there, because I worked there for 5 years myself, um, was, I wouldn't call it similar, but probably just as impulsive.
You're right.
You know, it's like I was in a meeting, like a town hall sort of all employee meeting where the director at the time was, peddling some bullshit. And I looked around the room and I felt like, you know what, everybody's buying this. I can't do this anymore. And I went and wrote my letter of resignation. And right after I called and got another job somewhere else,
Yeah.
and that was it. That was it. Just like that,
Right.
And sometimes, there's something about spontaneity that is really, really powerful. I think a decision like that, most people would tell you not to make it that way. But, it's courageous. It is. And it's like taking ownership of your life, which is, guys, is really important for us to do. To just like step up and do it, And it sounds like that's what you did, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I remember the clinical director even came up to me and said, "Hey, are you sure you want to do this? Do you ever really think this out?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no." He's like, "This is a really bad idea. Don't you think this is kind of a bad idea?" I'm like, "It might be, but I'm going to do it because I already made up my mind." And I completely agree that these things. I mean, I know how I feel at any given point of time, and I remember that I would walk into that office every single day, and I was so resentful and so miserable.
Yeah.
And and I know that me saying that I'm not going to be there anymore relieves so much of that tension inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the right thing to do. And the uncertainty of not having a job or a career path, I had more comfort in that uncertainty than I did actually showing up there every day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, what I've come to learn is, having felt that way many times over the course of my career, that's how we know. We're supposed to listen to that stuff.
Right.
We're not supposed to just power through it and keep going because it's a good job. I mean, that's our higher self telling us, no, you're not in the right place.
Right.
You need to make a decision here. So I'm glad you did. So then you did the home health care thing down here, right?
Right.
Which lasted
exactly
4 years, did you say? Or
yeah, it was about 4 years. I sold it. It's about a little over 4 years. I remember, I got it to a point that for me, I was done. I mean, like I was really, I think, maxed out on growing quickly the organic route. I mean, I made my presence. I had the referral sources that I was going to have, and I could continue to eat away at new sources, but it was going to take years of relationship building. And as I told you, I didn't want to be in the senior game for too long, right? Yeah, I didn't want to be like the senior care guy. Yeah. And then I looked at acquisitions. I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? Getting to play with money and capital structure. And then I did the math on that and what it was going to look like to bring in outside capital and buy some, and it just didn't pencil, right? I mean, the amount of work and the return profile wasn't good enough. So I went to my brother, who is a private equity venture capital guy, and I said, what should I do? This is what I've done, and I feel like a need to do more. I don't know if I want to start another business, so to speak. And he told me, why don't you look at early stage investing? It's a ton of fun, specifically in technology. You get to learn a lot. You get to work with the smartest people around. And it sounded really interesting to me at the time, but South Florida was not the place to look for venture capital deals, right? Mm-hmm. So he gave me, through a little bit of nepotism, he got me into working at a software fund here in Arizona, where essentially I became, an unpaid intern at 30 years old. Mm-hmm. For a year to learn the ropes. And I didn't know anything about technology, and I didn't know anything really about finance, except from what I learned in business school. And then I had these soft skills from working in treatment of how to communicate and, how to, really kind of cut the bullet and get to the point and,
Right.
these types of things that are really important. But, as we talked about earlier, that finesse that you need to have when talking to people and working with behavioral change. I had that, and that's a really strong skill, and it's pretty horizontal in many different business cases.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and then I started working for another firm down here called Canal Partners, and they were really interested and started to write bigger checks. And I still work for them now, but I'm kind of coming into another inflection point where, the capital markets are extremely frothy. Some of my partners are retiring and, don't have a ton of interest in doing a ton more of these venture deals. And I was in a spot in my life where I wanted more and I wanted to expand. I also, at the same time, just had a daughter and, got married within, a year. And I was getting kind of stressed out at work and kind of getting to that dissatisfaction mode again, that same feeling of a job that I used to love. And, there was parts of it that I just absolutely hated. There's parts I loved, right? But, the parts that I loved were dwarfed by the things that I didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually got a coach and worked with him for about 3 to 6 months. And, I was talking to him and he said, well, you've learned so much in these last couple of years. Why don't you try to see if you can pull $100,000 out of your ass? Right. And I was like, okay. Right. So I went on my phone and, I called up a couple of companies that I thought could use what I do. Right. And, basically it's capturing the accountability and the metrics and the KPIs of venture capital and taking somebody else's money and applying it into, small businesses that are profitable, but really have no structure to get them to the next level. And it's because they don't have, investors' money, right? I mean, they don't have that smart board that's going to push them or bringing in outside people or best in class operators. So, they're great businesses, they're profitable, but they, are just hitting walls. So I went to a couple of companies. I said, listen, I'm not trying to hustle fees. I'm just doing this because the capital markets are frothy and I want to see if I can add value. And, I signed a couple of clients on and I'm doing that right now. And I absolutely love it.
Wow. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's talk about this coach thing. How did you arrive at that?
So, I remember I was walking into my garage and my wife came up to me and she started crying. I don't know what the specific reason was at that time, but, she was weeping and, saying like, David, you never pay attention to me. You're in your head. You come home. Like, I don't feel like I'm not even there. And that's, things that I've heard before. It's that wasn't new information to me. But there was something about that particular time where I knew that there was a moment of clarity where I knew that if I continued this behavior, I was going to end up divorced.
Mm.
I just knew it. And it wasn't going to be that week or maybe even that year, but I had to change. And I didn't want to be divorced. I came from divorce and I've seen that playbook.
Yeah. So what was it? Can you pin it down what it is that you knew you needed to change?
Yeah, well, everything, really. I mean, specifically, I needed to have confidence in myself that I can provide value to other people without having this infrastructure around me, like of a treatment center that full of really smart counselors or a venture firm backed by a billionaire, that I myself, David Paul, could transmit value and people are willing to pay for it. And that I'm good enough to do that. And I think I missed that. I felt like I always needed something to validate me going forward. And through this exercise, I realized that I actually have this innate ability to help people and people are willing to pay for it. That's one. Two, I really needed to date my wife again. I had to plan things to do and, keep my phone at home. and, set boundaries with my partners, and basically, and what I did is I told them, and you talk about those decision points. I remember I was doing my 90-day targets in my garage with my coach. And I was thinking about, okay, maybe I should find another job. How is this going to look? Maybe a different fund. And then finally I was like, you know what? The bottom line is I'm going to leave this job. I'm going to quit Canal Partners by this date. Right. And so, and then it was like, okay, there's no more pressure on having to find another job. But like the bottom line is I'm going to allow myself to be miserable for this amount of more time. And whatever happens in that meantime happens. And, when I put that date on the wall, like everything just kind of fell into place and it made sense. And I actually didn't really even quit Canal Partners. I basically told him, I'll look at deals with you. I'll do the stuff that I want to do within venture capital, but, don't pay me, right? Because I don't want to do everything else, right, that I don't like. So I still get to, taste what I want and, get to work on purposeful work that I want to do going forward, which is really just being impactful and helping entrepreneurs. That's where I really, really get a lot of gratification.
Wow. The word that keeps popping into my head as I'm listening to you is intention. Because what you're talking about is setting that date for yourself. That's a clear intention. Like this is what I'm going to do. Come hell or high water.
Right.
And also with the dating your wife thing, because what that's really about is you being committed to invest in the relationship, and to give it like your pure attention and energy. But again, it's you setting an intention that this is important enough to me that I'm going to invest in it, which is awesome. You know? And when I listen to people talk about things like this, I can't help but think about, I don't know how you feel about it, but if I were you, I would feel really fortunate that like you have this insight and the support to be able to like clearly look at yourself in the mirror and recognize this isn't what I want. I'm going to change and be willing to do it. Because I think most people, I could be wrong, but I guess my assumption is that most people just kind of coast through life,
Yeah, it's unbelievable. They're like, they're drones, and it's sad.
It is sad. It is. And, the other thing that you're talking about, like as you engaged with this coach, and when you're talking about like believing in yourself, that you yourself bring something of value, when that really happens for us is when we're really authentic.
Right.
That's how we tap into that.
Right.
Which goes back to the heart of what I want to try to do with this podcast, because as we're talking, it's the world would be such a better place if more of us were doing what we really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And now, like, I do a group on Wednesdays with a bunch of young guys, and we're talking about career stuff and aspirations, and I see it clearly now, what I couldn't see when I was their age. And that's that whatever it is that you want to do, you're given that. And no matter what anybody tells you, there's a way for you to make it doing that. And it might not be exactly what you think it might end up looking like, but if you pursue it, you'll figure it out. And, especially working in addiction, the reason I got way off track was, I wasn't being myself. I wasn't doing what I really wanted to be doing with my life. And I got to a point at 19 years old where I was like, what the fuck am I doing? This isn't what I want. And I felt stuck. So then that's when the drinking really kind of crossed a line at that point. But I can take a look back over all those things, and it's all the problems come from me compromising my authenticity on some
absolutely.
level. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was it was me compromising my authenticity, because I thought I needed to appease certain people. So there was some, you know, I don't know what you want to call it, but some programming in my head that said I had to do this or I had to do that in order to be happy. I mean, I remember when I went into handling and went into treatment and I was talking to these counselors, I'm like, I had to do this because I've never felt more connected with other people. And I just love these guys so much. So my life has to be in this addiction world. I had to kind of follow this path. And then I realized, I was like, yeah, fuck this. Sucks. Yeah. You know, like, this is terrible. Right. I mean, the only difference between me and the patients is I have a key. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like there's like, I'm insane. And then with the venture capital thing, it was the same playbook. I was dealing with my brother, my older brother, who, you know, I call him my brother dad because he's in his 60s. And, you know, by the way, looks just like my dad. I'm sure there's no, you know, underlying psychological, fuckery that's going on there. But, you know, he flies a jet and like has shit ton of money and, you know, he, you know, does really interesting things. And I felt like, yep, that's it. That's what I need to be. Right. And me not staying in this position means that I'm not cut out for this and that I shouldn't do this. And like, that's wrong. I'm supposed to be a private equity venture capital titan of industry. And, you know, I was reading actually some Stoic philosophy and, you know, they talk about, I think that it was in Latin, memento mori, and that's constantly thinking about your own death and not an intention to be morbid, but intention to really understand, like, are you doing everything you're supposed to be doing in your life? Right.
And living in the moment, you know?
Right. And I was like, no, fuck that. Like, I am not happy. If I get hit by a bus next week, I would not want to be doing what I'm doing right now.
Right. This is something I've thought about the last couple of years myself because, you know, we just live within all these social constructs that like, oh, well, this is what you're supposed to do. You know, like you get a job, you work full time, you have 2.5 kids. You know, if you're not married by the time you're 30, there's something wrong with you. You know, there are all these things.
Yeah. Well, what's your major in school? Right.
If you're a guy and you cry, there's something wrong with you. I mean, there are all sorts of things. And you know what, really, I almost feel silly when I talk about this, but this really opened my eyes over the last couple years. Because, you know, I'm a single guy. I live alone when my boy's not here. He's here about half the time. But you know, I grew up in this house where there was this really strong work ethic. And so, you know, on weekends when I was a kid, I'd be out mowing yards or helping little old ladies or, you know, I was hustling, making money. And if I slept until like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, my dad would be yelling up the stairs, get out of that bed. You know, you're not going to sleep the day away. And it was just imprinted on my brain. And so here I am in my 40s and it just hit me like a couple years ago. I feel guilty for sleeping in. That's fucking stupid.
Right.
Like I get to decide. I get to decide. I don't have to feel bad. I can live my life any way that I want. But, you know, for all these different reasons, whether it's social or familial or whatever, we impose all these limitations upon ourselves. And that's kind of what you're talking about letting go of those limitations and just doing whatever you want. Having the freedom to just be who you are. And I wish more of us would do it. I really think the world would be a better place. And you know, you've worked with young guys struggling with addiction and stuff. So many parents get hung up on, well, you know, he only needs a couple more credits to have an accounting degree.
Oh, God. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it.
But he wants to be a musician.
Right.
Yeah, but, you know, he could have the accounting. And I'm like,
Yeah, he wants to drink
Do you
coffee
want a
and smoke
dead
cigarettes,
accountant?
right?
Do you want a dead accountant, or,
Right,
or do
yeah.
you want a happy music store clerk who plays in a band on the weekends,
Right.
who doesn't get drunk all the time anymore? You know, it's just we lose sight of what's important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we really, really do. It's crazy. Tell me about parenthood. What's that been like? How old is she?
She just turned 1.
Okay.
So parenthood, I would say, it's difficult in the sense that I don't get to do everything I want to do all the time. Right. So that initially is like that fucks the car. That fucks my system up. Right. Because I normally do whatever I want, whenever I want. I've got a really cool wife, and she's got her, thing, and we come together and we, have our own time, but, generally was very independent with her thing, and I had my thing. And now we have a kid, and that changes. I compare it to having like a puppy that just fucks up your house. Like you're pissed and you're annoyed, but it's your puppy and you love it, right? So that's kind of how, I think having a kid is, but it's like 10 puppies in one, right? I mean, it's you created it. My biggest challenge, I would say so far, and where I struggle the most, is co-parenting with my wife.
Okay.
That gets extremely difficult. I had absolutely zero, role models for parenting, but yet I've got a ton of opinions about it.
Yeah.
And, my wife, she's, kind of a type A personality, and she's become, like super mom and hovers. And, so we butt heads a lot, and dealing with my wife, who was my wife and my lover and my best friend, and now she's a mom, an overbearing mom, at certain times it changes the dynamic. She can be not as cool as she used to be. And, we generally have, through a lot of work, have had some really great conversations about that and continue to work on that. But it's a challenge.
Yeah. Do you remember what it felt like the moment she was born?
Oh, yeah.
What did you feel?
Yeah. Well, it was crazy, Tom, because it was a really high and scared moment at the same time. So she was a C-section baby, and my wife labored for a couple of days because she was induced. And, all of a sudden they give me the baby. Everything's great. My wife's, drugged up, cut the cord. She got curly hair. She looks like me. She smells like a tadpole. Everything's wonderful. And then all of a sudden my wife starts hemorrhaging, right? Considerably. Yeah. I mean, all of a sudden I'm seeing like pools of blood come off the table. Right. And then, the doctors that were having like this, very, light conversation as like they're doing the surgery are now very quiet. Right. And are very focused. And, new instruments are coming in. New people are coming in. And I'm sitting there with a baby, and I'm just seeing blood pour down. And my wife turns gray as a stone and asks me if she's going to be all right. Is, what's going on? And I'm holding this baby, and I'm seeing all this blood. I'm like, oh my God, am I about to watch my wife die?
Wow.
And I'm holding the baby, and am I going to pass out? Right. Like, I mean, somebody should probably take this baby, because I could pass out at any time now. Right. And they said for me to kind of, sit back and relax, that she's hemorrhaging, but they're working on clotting it. Long story short is she's obviously okay. They had to stop the hemorrhaging with balloon because of, I guess her uterus was overtired from working for 3 days, but she lost a ton of blood. And I remember laying there in post-op, and she was, completely gray, and my feeling of me losing her, right? And her looking at me saying, am I going to be okay? Right. And me not knowing, right? Like, I could not confidently say that she was going to be okay, seeing the other side of that sheet, which was complete blood and gore.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember I just broke out crying. I just was sobbing. And I put the baby in her little bassinet, and I was with my wife, and I was up for a couple of days. And I realized that even though I was so incredibly tired, like, I had to stay up. This was my tribe
right
at this point. And I mean, I was so acutely aware, like I was like Wolverine awareness of my daughter's breathing and my wife's breathing. And I remember the nurse was like, all right, time to take care of your girls. And she walked out, and it was me and it was my family. And like, that's when I knew, like, I've transitioned into being this alpha, this leader of my unit, and that I had to be there and I had to be above myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I think some guys don't get, that, actually being a man involves a higher purpose.
Oh yeah.
Bigger than us.
I remember my coach, my first meeting, we're talking about the family portion of my wheel of abundance, right? And being, holistically whole. And he said, well, tell me about your wife, tell me about your kid. And he knows that I was, I work a lot, and I've got, I work with lots of money, and I invest lots of money with people, and I raise tons of money. And he's like, he's worked with private equity guys before. And he says, well, like, just let me ask you honestly, do you want to have like a relationship with your wife and kid? And I'm like, of course. What the fuck are you talking about? Of course I do. And he's like, the reason why I ask is because a lot of guys don't.
Yeah.
They have a wife and kid because that's expected, but they really just want to have the most minimal friction as possible. And they want to go out and play golf and come home and not get divorced, but aren't really totally interested and are very honest about it, of not wanting to be super involved.
Yeah. So you determined that you definitely do want to be super involved?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the tip of the spear of why I needed coaching, is I needed to be engaged. I couldn't come home and just look at my phone all day.
Right.
It wasn't sustainable.
So what's changed?
So I'm going to tell you like what has been, and this is like gold,
Okay.
was this thing that I do in the morning, and I call it my power hour. And this was like the greatest gift that anyone has ever given me. And it's basically, I wake up at 4 a.m. because I can't wake up too late, because then everything kind of fucks with my day, and I need this hour to myself. Right. So I go up, I go into the other room, I go down, I do 7 minutes of meditation. I do journaling. Sometimes I free journal. Sometimes I use like, the Stoic meditation guide to look at, something that's inspirational if I get writer's block. I write a note to my wife and to my daughter on a Post-it note every day. And then I go and I read something. It could be anything, right? Any book that I'm reading. And then I go work out in my garage for an hour. And I do all of that, Tom, before I look at my phone.
Yeah.
And if I do all of that, right, and I activate my mind, my, the balance piece, the engagement, like with my kids, even though like they're not awake, but I'm putting an effort in, I'm thinking about something specific that I can give to them during that day, kind of getting centered with breath work, and then, getting movement done. I mean, dude, I'm fucking bulletproof. It's just unbelievable. And I've tried like sleeping in a little bit and like, doing half of it, and I fall apart like a cheap suit. Like, this has been the best thing since, learning that I had to go to AA meetings, right? That has given me a solution to life. And it's really just, 5 simple things in 1 hour of your day that I take aside to just focus on these core areas.
Wow.
Yeah. You knew me when I was a scuba diving instructor and drinking monsters.
Yes. Lots of monsters.
Smoking cigarettes.
Smoking cigarettes.
Right.
Yeah, but man, you've changed, dude.
I'm telling you. I mean, and it was just it's just these things. And then, I throw in some intermittent fasting in there, and I throw some targets of where I want to do with work, and I throw some targets. I did this men's retreat up in Crestone, Colorado with David Dita, the guy who wrote The Way of the Superior Man. That was like mind blowing. It could have been one of the best things I've ever done in my life. It was like 7 days of complete and utter men's work and meditation and yoga practices. And, it's just those things along with my life and dating my wife and writing journals, and just makes a difference.
Yeah. And essentially it's reprioritizing.
Oh, exactly.
You're taking care of yourself and your body. It's so that you can show up Really, that's what it is.
That's it.
Yeah. A lot of times guys get better in all these other ways, but then they don't take care of their body or their mind.
Oh yeah.
And
you can get sober without all this stuff. I mean, all you really need is, a connection to a higher power and some guys and maybe a 12-step meeting or two, a week. And, you can do that. But, at some point you're looking around the room and everyone's either smoking cigarettes or has their leg wrapped in some kind of wrap because they're it's gangrenous,
Yes.
and they smoke and, they fucking are divorced and they cheat on their wives and, and then that's great. You know what I mean? Because they're sober, but is that enough for me at 34, 35 years old? No, not for me.
Well, and, we kind of got into this a little bit in the last episode I recorded, just that was another sober guy. But, I'm really interested in going that layer deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I always have been. And I feel like one of the real blessings for me in my growth is that I'm curious about myself and I'm kind of fascinated with all these things, like what makes us tick and all that. It's just always fascinated me. And I think, some people don't have that and they're just like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that family of origin work, or I don't want to take a look at that trauma or loss that I experienced. And okay, so you're going to live life with this low grade sickness.
Right. Right. Exactly.
That's what it's going to be. That's how, and you're always going to be kind of miserable, and it's probably you're probably going to bleed out onto all the people who love you.
Mm-hmm.
Guys like you and I are really blessed to just keep chipping away at it, man. We just got to keep getting better.
Mm-hmm.
So, listening to you talk about becoming a dad, wait until she starts talking to you.
Oh God.
That'll change things. But I remember when Jack was born, just feeling this sense of completion that I never really felt before. It was like, I don't want to sound morbid, but I literally thought, you know what, if I died right now, everything would be okay.
Oh yeah.
Like I did what I came here to do. And it's weird, but yeah. And now, he's 13.
I'm so glad I had a girl. You know what I mean? Like I feel like my son would hate me.
Really?
There's a natural inclination, I think, with boys to try to toughen them up, and, I don't have this experience because I don't have a boy, but, you're giving a legacy, right? I'm sure you've had a lot of awareness around this. This isn't part of your parenthood, but I just see a lot of, my friends just treat their sons like shit. They're like little boys, but, you're trying to pass on this legacy and try to get them ready for the future, but they're just these sweet little innocent boys. And, I'm just glad my first one really softened me up because, she's a little girl and, she wears ribbons in her hair and she owns my ass. Right. Yeah. Completely.
Well, there really hasn't been a greater impetus for change and growth in my life than my son.
Yeah.
Because it just brings everything up constantly. And probably the most difficult part of that was catching on to, okay, this is what's happening.
Right.
And listen, my mom and dad were great. They did the best they could. They weren't perfect like all other parents. So this isn't like a complaint, but I think all of us on some level when we're parenting want to do better than our parents did.
Of course.
So recently I had somebody tell me, not being them isn't the same as being you.
I like that.
It's true too, because for the longest time, I would come from this place where he'd ask me if we could go do something, and in my head, I'd think, well, my dad would have said no, so I should say yes. You know,
Right.
I mean,
right. Exactly.
but think
Yeah.
about that happening 100 times a day,
Right.
and you're not even aware of it. It's just going
Right.
on.
Like you're just trying to like blatantly be defiant, right? To be defiant because, you have some kind of resentment or overtone that
But
your
it's so
dad,
subtle
you could
that
do
you
better.
don't even
Right.
realize it's going on until you really
Right.
get tuned into it and pay attention and really feel. That's what it is. If you really tune in and feel what's going on inside of you in those moments, because it's like a little mini trigger, of emotion that takes place. It's crazy. It really is. But I mean, and for me, like, I remember, I loved baseball, dude. I couldn't wait to have a little boy so I could teach him how to play baseball and we could bond through that. And I know a lot about it and I could pass it on to him. And we could play catch and all this shit. And long story short, I mean, he lasted one T-ball game, and he's an athletic kid. He could do anything if he wanted to, but he just wasn't into it.
Yeah.
At the time, what was going on in our family and stuff like that, like, it's not what he wanted to be doing with his time. And he was kind of shy about it. And, at first, I mean, I'm like, well, you made a commitment. He's 4 years old. He's 4 years old, and I remember this one game. I mean, we could get him to bat, but he wouldn't go out in the field. And I remember sitting, and I had like trained to be a coach. You have to go through this class or whatever. And I was going to be a coach. And I remember sitting on the bench and like just ready to jump out of my skin. I don't know what to do to get him to go out and in right field where he's supposed to be, and just like, the world's coming to an end, or something, like, what am I going to do? And this other dad says, "What's wrong, Jack? You don't want to go out? You don't want to go out there?" And he said, "No." And the guy said, "That's okay. You will when you want to." And I was like, holy shit, I need to take a breath here. Like, this is not important,
Right.
I got to mellow out. And, so, he bowed out. Where parents get in trouble is, they're not really a reflection of us. They're supposed to be who they are, and we're supposed to help them figure out how to be who they are. That's the thing. And so, like, I can't imagine being a dad who, like, or a family, parents who just sign your kids up for all this shit because that's what you do, and you're making their agenda for them and all that stuff. I mean, it's always been important to me to let him be who he is. And I'll support him. And if there's something I can do to help him with ideas or whatever, absolutely. But, he can figure a lot out on his own. And, so, years and years go by and it's getting to the point where he's like 10, 12 years old and he still hasn't found his thing. And that's really what was important to me. Not what he did, but that he had something that he could love. Mm-hmm. And he found it. He found it, when he's about 11 years old. We found this, somebody had been telling me, you got to take him to this theater, this kid's theater. He'd love it. He'd be great at it. And I finally took him and he was like, "Dad, I want to do that." And he's been doing it ever since. And he's been freaking killing it. Killing it. And he loves it. Like, so even when he's not in a show, he wants to be there. He found his tribe. He's going there and he's volunteering and stuff. And, he's happy. So, and I just wanted him to find something because, by the time I was his age, I was already getting in a lot of trouble. And kids who don't have something get in trouble.
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah, man, fasten your seatbelt. And just embrace it because it's going to give an opportunity to you to grow in a way that you haven't before. And it'll be good. And you'll be a better man because of it.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. It's interesting what you said. There's Sane Guru, who's, I guess, this, Hindu, Buddhist meditation, kind of guy. I was watching a YouTube video about, he's talking about consciousness and society and, living in kind of enlightenment. And he was talking about parenthood. And he said that, one of the biggest, problems that, people have in the world is that we think that we have to raise our children. And the term raise in itself is a connotation like you raise livestock, right? Like, you don't raise a human being. A human being is supposed to be developed and formed, and your job is to just be there to nurture them and to let them grow like some kind of plant, like a tree. And there's no raising. I mean, that would imply that you had control.
Right. Yeah. Well, and another thing that I can't remember the context, but I was having a conversation with somebody else who's been in the helping profession for a really long time. And I was talking about Jack, and she's a mom, grown kids at this point. And, she just looked at me and said, you got to remember they're not our kids.
Right.
Implying they're God's kids, and that's really the truth. I mean, they are entrusted to us to care for them. That's really what it is. And and part of me, just part of my personal philosophy is relevant here. It's that, when it comes to healing or growing or succeeding or whatever, I mean, we all have it. Like, we all have what we need. Sometimes we might need somebody to show us. But I was around when you were like getting better, but I didn't do anything. I was there. It was you. It was you. And I think a lot of people who do the kind of work that I do and you have done, we forget that sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is a humanistic endeavor, and we should believe in these people.
Right.
And I know there's one of the things I used to say to you guys, is I'd rather be the kind of guy who believes in somebody than the kind of guy who doesn't.
Yeah. And it's so funny. It's like the treatment business is just kind of, and there's relevance to it, and I understand it, but it's like, let's just keep somebody in treatment as long as possible until they kind of clear up, I should say, their head. And, whatever the case may be, they are probably making a wrong decision, and their disease is telling them to do something that is going to get them high again. And like, I see to a degree that being true, but I also see that we are kind of ignoring the human potential, right? And, that what you just spoke about, like, giving people the quality, the ability to fall down or to make mistakes or to grow autonomously. And which, where's the line there?
Well, and what you're talking about is parenting, which at the end of the day, that's kind of what the work is, is reparenting or parenting in a way. But yeah, I've changed a lot since, you and I spent a lot of time together. I mean, and I feel like I'm better than I ever have been at what I do. But I definitely I'm not as rigid minded as I was. I don't know that I even was that rigid, but yeah, one of the things that drives me crazy now when it comes to like mutual support groups and self-help world, and I see it, I like Instagram, so I'm on there a lot, and I see these guys who are like positioning themselves as these like sober, inspirational guys. Follow me on, I have 13,000 followers on, and I'll get on there and do a video, and, the guy leads with, I was a piece of shit, and, all this self-defeating stuff, and this is somebody who's been sober like 28 years. Like, really? Is that what is that what you've learned? That you were a
Right.
piece of shit? You know, because me, you know, like what I know is I felt like shit.
Right.
And if everything was okay, I wouldn't have drank the way I did when I was a little kid.
Right.
Everything wasn't okay. It wasn't that I was a piece of shit. It wasn't that I was defective or something was wrong with me. I just don't believe that. I really, really don't. And it like on some level, I've gotten to the point where it kind of hurts me to even hear somebody talk about themselves that way anymore.
Right.
And I've even gotten to the extreme where, like, listen, I don't question that, you know, I've had a serious experience with addiction. I nearly drank myself to death. You know, if I fit into the category of an alcoholic, but you know, how long do I want to call myself an alcoholic? Mm-hmm. Do I really need to describe myself that way 23 years later? Does that really make any sense? Because, and where I kind of got, how I got there, and I'm not saying this to like disrespect anybody else who does things the way they do them, and I haven't always thought this way, but for me, what it boils down to is like, you know, our neuropathways, and you learn about Eastern thought, and you know, there are all these mantras that people use or create for themselves, and you know, these repetitive things, like, and they're positive messages that you're repeating into your brain, and you know, you're building neuropathways, and if we say bad things about ourselves, it will work just as well to build those neuropathways. Yeah. And so, like, people like me, you know, who, you know, essentially I was a kid who had a deficiency in self-esteem for whatever reasons. You know, I had plenty of the I'm a piece of shit kind of messages that I was giving myself by that time, right? You know, so now it's time to, like, and it took me a while to, but it's something over the last, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. I mean, you talked about journaling. Sometimes when I journal, all I do is just repeatedly write a mantra. Right. If that's all I got at that time, that's enough. You know, it's doing something good for myself. Mm-hmm. And I can't overstate how much that has helped me, just nurturing my brain in that way. Mm-hmm. Just saying good things about myself. Mm-hmm. You know, just like you saying, you know what, I have something of value to offer this world. I don't need someone else's framework to fit within. You know, I can just be me. And I had to go through that too, you know, like, you know, I can just do a group. I don't need somebody to tell me I can do it at their place. I can just go do it, you know? It's okay. And it's just a matter of, but that's been a process of beginning to, like, not impose limitations upon myself. That's really what it is. And seeing things from an abundance perspective rather than a scarcity perspective. And man, I could just go on and on. It's awesome to talk to you and hear, like, that you're doing more, and that you're being intentional about being a good dad and a good husband. And, you know, that's at this point in my life and in my career, what I'm really interested in is helping men be better men, because we need that, you know, and I think there are a lot of voices out there who are talking about it and are helping people. But I also know there are a lot of other guys who, if they get the right message, if it's something compelling to them, they'll change too, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I'm all about these days. I feel like there's a huge audience of people who, men, you know, just who feel unfulfilled. Mm-hmm. And don't feel that vitality of manhood. And, you know, when we don't have that, it comes out in all sorts of screwed up ways. either we treat women like shit or we kick the dog or, there's all kinds of stuff guys do, to try to work that out. And, really what they need is to feel like a man and feel better about themselves and have something to live for and, have a meaning, having some meaning and purpose in your life. It's just so important. But, well, Dave, any words of wisdom you'd like to offer whoever's listening to this at this point before we shut it down?
Yeah, I would say if I was to offer anything to the audience is create your own power hour, right? Do some, create a moment of time, a container of experience that you do every single day. And, it doesn't have to be mine, but it mine includes meditation, journaling, reading, writing a note to my loved ones and working out. And doing that simple practice has completely 10x'd my life without a doubt.
Wow.
That would be, I would say, the biggest piece of value that I could give.
All right. Well, listen, man, I really appreciate you doing this with me and look forward to talking again.
Absolutely, Tom.
All right.
You have a great one.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Path to Authenticity. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can find links in the show notes or visit our website at thepathtooauthenticity.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, if you have a suggestion for a topic, or you know someone who would make a great guest, email the show at thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. If you know someone else who would enjoy the show or even just a particular episode, please share it with them. Every little bit helps. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider becoming one wherever it is you choose to listen. You can find the show on Patreon, where by becoming a patron, you can hear episodes before they're released publicly. You can gain access to supplemental content. There are other benefits in the various tiers. Visit patreon.com/thepathtooauthenticity. Join our Facebook community or follow the show on Instagram, both at The Path to Authenticity. We also have a YouTube channel. You can connect with us on Twitter or Pinterest. To hear the songs from this and every episode, you can find the Path to Authenticity playlist on Spotify. Obviously, there are a lot of ways you could be spending your time, so I appreciate you spending some of it here with me. I'm Tom Gentry. Thanks for listening. Be nice.
You did great, honeybee.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.